I tried to upload a video of me reading Napalm and Silly Putty by George Carlin since TikTok decided to kick me off live for reading it, and then they removed the sound. So, we're moving on to the Federalist Papers. Message to Mankind. The authors and supporters of the Constitution of 1787 foresaw that a clear-cut vote against it in the state ratifying conventions would destroy the United States' most important experiment in popular government. A particular point of concern was the growing state of New York, whose governor, George Clinton, was a formidable opponent of the proposed charter. Alexander Hamilton, in an energetic effort to win over his home state, began a series of essays explaining and defending the Constitution. These were published in New York City newspapers under the pseudonym Publius. Hamilton was aided by contributions from two advocates of a new and energetic national government, James Madison and John Jay. The efforts of these three men resulted in the Federalist Papers, an authoritative analysis of the young nation's constitution and an enduring classic of political philosophy. Let's begin. Introduction. The Constitution that emerged from the Philadelphia Convention in September 1787 has been called a bundle of compromises. But at the time it struck many Americans as something more ominous. In its opponents' eyes, the proposed Constitution was flawed at best and at worst downright sinister. George Mason, for example, the author of the Virginia Declaration of Rights and one of the most distinguished delegates to the Federal Convention, refused to sign the document because of the unfortunate mistakes he detected in it. This government will commence in a moderate aristocracy, he predicted, and though it was impossible to tell whether, in its operation, it would produce a monarchy or a corrupt, oppressive aristocracy, it would probably vibrate some years between the two, and then terminate in the one or the other. Other critics were less charitable. They discerned in the document an insidious design to deprive us of our liberties. The Constitution, one wrote, was the most daring attempt to establish a despotic aristocracy among freemen that the world has ever witnessed. The Constitution's friends were not satisfied with the document either. No man's ideas were more remote from the plan than mine were known to be, Alexander Hamilton announced to the convention on the day he signed the Constitution. James Madison confided to Thomas Jefferson that the plan, should it be adopted, will neither effectually answer its national object, nor prevent the local mischiefs which everywhere excite disgust against the state governments. Its friends, in short, feared the convention's compromises had resulted in a plan of government too weak and incoherent to save the American republicanism. Its opponents suspected that the Constitution, whether by accident or by design, was a formidable engine that would subvert republicanism in favor of some sort of aristocratic domination. The great accomplishment of the Federalist, known as the Federalist Papers, was to show that the Constitution was both coherent and Republican. Suppressing their private doubts and disappointments, Hamilton and Madison, joined by John Jay, undertook the series of essays in order to expound the merits of the new Constitution and to answer the objections to it that had already begun to appear in newspaper columns in New York and across the United States. More than any other speech or writing in defense of the new plan of government, the Federalists showed that the Constitution contained an inherent constitutionalism, which gave a purpose to the whole document and to each of its parts. To put it differently, the Federalist articulated the overall integrity of the Constitution, showing how it fit the requirements of Republican government as a whole. Without denying the plan's origin and political give and take, the Federalists thus interpreted the Federal Convention as having been a forum, not for, at least not mostly for, self-interested bargaining, but for public, spirited deliberation. The product of those deliberations was a fundamental law sufficiently rational and coherent to be regarded almost as the product of a single wise mind or legislator. The U.S. Constitution, unlike the laws of many ancient cities, was not, of course, the work of one wise lawgiver, a point that the Federalist emphasizes. Moreover, the Constitution contained compromises, obscurities, imperfections. I never expect to see a perfect work from imperfect man, the final Federalist paper admitted. But the obscurities and imperfections were turned to account as additional reasons why this law needed the elaboration, explanation, and defense of a single commentator, whose commentary soon became accepted as authoritative, and so helped to fix the meaning of the Constitution itself. This commentator was Publius, the pen name chosen by the then anonymous authors of the Federalist. By drawing out the reasoning latent in the text and completing it with his reasoning, Publius presented the Constitution as an achievement in good government, a plan worthy not only of momentary applause, but of the rational and enduring consent of an enlightened public. In fact, Publius quickly became accepted as the best guide not only to how the framers had understood the Constitution when they wrote it, but also to how the people of the United States had understood the Constitution when they ratified it. Thomas Jefferson described the Federalist in 1788 as the best commentary on the principles of government which was ever written. In 1825, he recommended it as an authority on the distinctive principles of the governments of Virginia and the United States, second in importance only to the Declaration of Independence. Writing then almost 40 years after its publication, Jefferson endorsed the Federalist as an authority to which appeal is habitually made by all, and rarely declined or denied by any as evidence of the general opinion of those who framed, and of those who accepted the Constitution of the United States, on questions as to its genuine meaning. In this case, in fact, he recommended the Federalist as a guide to the Constitution itself. Little wonder, then, that the political scientist Clinton Rossiter, writing in 1961, acknowledged the Federalist as the most important work in political sciences ever been written, or is likely ever to be written, in the United States. It is, indeed, the one product of the American mind that is rightly counted among the classics of political theory. Yoked together, then, as Publius, Hamilton and Madison were encouraged not only to downplay their sense of the Constitution's inadequacies, but to review in a new light the Constitution as a whole, and to construct the strongest possible argument on its behalf, stretching the chance of good to be expected from the plan, Hamilton's words, into an account of the consistent good that would result from it, if only it were properly understood and administered. The Federalist appeared in New York newspapers beginning on October 27, 1787, addressed to the people of the state of New York. The popular salutation reflected the fact that the state legislature had decreed universal male suffrage for the election to the state ratifying convention, whereas voting for state offices had property qualifications attached. The first essay joined a debate already in progress. Hamilton had himself published 2 letters in July and September attacking Governor George Clinton, later the state's anti-Federalists. Essays by the anti-Federalist writer Cato had begun appearing on September 27th, followed by the first of the powerful anti-Federalists, Brutus, papers on October 18th. Probably disappointed with the rather petulant tone of his own letters and impressed with the seriousness of the new anti-Federalist sallies, Hamilton resolved to launch a new, extensive series of essays under a pen name and with the help of collaborators. As a title for the series, the Federalist stole a march on its opponents by claiming the good name of federalism for the new Constitution and its supporters. This usage was not novel, for those who earlier in the 1780s had wanted to strengthen the powers of the federal Congress established by the Articles of Confederation had often called themselves Federalists and their opponents anti-Federalists. Still, the Constitution's opponents, now the defenders of the Articles of Confederation, against the much stronger central government proffered in the Constitution, thought themselves entitled to be called Federalists. After all, they were the advocates of loose confederal government, and, as they saw it, the Constitution's supporters were pushing consolidated or centralized government. Hamilton beat them to it, however, and his opponents were left in an awful political limbo. History knows them now only as the anti-Federalists. He chose Publius as a pseudonym, trumping his adversaries' invocation of heroes of the late Roman Republic, Brutus and Cato, with the reference to one of the founders and saviors of republican Rome, Publius Valerius Publicola, whose biography was paired with that of Solon at Plutarch's famous Parallel Lives. Solon, the democratic lawgiver of Athens, had lived to see his polity overthrown by a tyrant, but the Roman Publius firmly established his republic, which endured and expanded for centuries. Moreover, after making his laws, Solon had left Athens for 10 years in order to avoid having to interpret his legislation. By contrast, Publius had remained in Rome in order to serve as consul, to improve, at a critical moment, the city's primitive republican laws, and to impart his own spirit of moderation, justice, and wisdom to the regime. What did this imply for the American Publius? At least this, that he wished to seize a fleeting moment favorable to constitution making, when the wise and moderate men of the Federal Convention would have their greatest influence in order to form a just and enduring republic and an extensive land. To accomplish this, he had to speak, or rather, write moderately, which meant inter alia, confining his ingenuity to the defense and explanation of the proposed constitution. By offering himself as their prudent counselor, Publius clearly subordinated himself to the people of New York and, by extension, the United States. But insofar as the people were persuaded by his interpretation of the Constitution and of republicanism, his own authority grew, as did the authority of wise statesmen who in the future would seek to guide their country by following his example. It was clear from the beginning that Hamilton intended the Federalists to match and overmatch the Anti-Federalist argument. He promised in Federalist No. 1 a satisfactory answer to all the objections that may seem to have any claim to your attention, and arranged for the papers to be printed and reprinted in the New York City press. At the height of the series, 3 or 4 new essays by Publius appeared every week, and each essay would eventually appear in 2 or 3 of the city's 5 newspapers. Small wonder that frustrated the readers sometimes complained, "Stop cramming us with the voluminous Publius," groaned 27 subscribers to the New York Journal. Not content with dominating the New York discussion, Hamilton also encouraged republication in out-of-state newspapers. To maintain this pace, he needed collaborators. He enlisted John Jay, who early fell ill. He apparently offered a spot to Gouverneur Morris, who declined, and William Duer submitted 3 essays which Hamilton rejected. Hamilton and Jay recruited Madison, who was in New York, as a Virginia delegate to Congress. At some point, and their collaboration lifted the Federalists to greatness. It also probably extended the series, which initially may have been slated to comprise 20 or 25 papers, not the 85 that finally resulted. We do not know the details of their collaboration. Hamilton and Madison had been prominent participants in the debates of the Philadelphia Convention, advocating quite different versions of a stronger and more coherent national government. And they had served together on the Committee of Style, which had prepared the final draft of the Constitution. Jay, the oldest and at the time most distinguished of the group, was a prominent lawyer who had drafted the New York Constitution of 1777 and who had negotiated alongside Benjamin Franklin and John Adams the Treaty of 1783 that had officially ended the Revolutionary War. Madison much later famously recalled the haste with which the papers were written, which prevented active collaboration, but he also remembered consulting with Hamilton on some of them. Each writer drew on materials he had prepared for, or during the convention, and each worked on topics congenial to him. Hamilton tackled the weakness of the Articles of Confederation, especially regarding domestic stability, war powers, taxation, and commercial regulation, and he surveyed the more energetic and high-toned branches of the government, the executive and the judiciary, along with a few aspects of the Senate. Madison expounded his theory of the extended public, the delicacy of the convention's task, federalism, republicanism, the general theory of the separation of powers, the House of Representatives, and important features of the Senate. Jay stuck to foreign policy in his 5 essays. Given their famous falling out a few years later, after which they remained bitter political enemies, Hamilton and Madison might seem unlikely co-authors. Indeed, several scholars in the 20th century have exercised themselves over the alleged schizophrenia of Publius, straining to identify latent disagreements between the principal co-authors. This approach clearly risked reading back into the 1780s the fierce partisan disputes of the 1790s. Besides, it has actually proved very difficult to determine who wrote several numbers of the Federalist, particularly numbers 55 through 58 and 62 and 63, claimed by both Madison and Hamilton. Even more scholarly ink has been spilled on this authorship controversy than on the book's supposed split personality. External evidence is inconclusive, and internal evidence has not dispelled the ambiguity. Researchers have resorted to computer analysis of the text in the attempt to settle who wrote what, but they have been hard-pressed to find a distinction they could rely on. Sentence length, marker words, all the more obvious tests failed to turn up a distinction that made a difference. Finally, a statistical difference was found in the use of utterly trivial words, but this threatened to make the differences between Hamilton and Madison utterly trivial. So similar, then, were the two men's arguments and writing style in the Federalist that their efforts to disguise themselves as Publius must be judged an extraordinary success. They clearly did not regard this as a personal or idiosyncratic work. Indeed, they kept their authorship secret, at least publicly, for many years, and later in their careers, each more or less disclaims the book as an adequate statement of his own political principles. So there is a very real sense in which Publius is the author of the Federalist Papers, because each writer strove to write as Publius, to write to the collective mark being set in the accumulating papers of the Federalist. After all, Hamilton, Madison, and Jay were in New York City together from October of 1787 to March of 1788. And although they did not look over each other's shoulder while composing, it is likely they did consult with one another on the general direction of the series and the division of labor emerging within it. And they may occasionally have edited one another's copy. They certainly read one another's essays eventually, if only in order to maintain the series' consistent argument and tone. When Hamilton decided to issue the collected papers in 2 hardcover volumes, he added a preface to the first volume in which he apologized for the violations of method and repetitions of ideas involved in the transformation of a newspaper series into a book. He admitted, however, that the latter defect had been intentionally indulged for rhetorical purposes. That is, in order to more effectively persuade the readers. It was not anxiety for the literacy character of the performance that compelled the apology, he added, but respect for public opinion, which would recognize repetition when it saw it. Hamilton intended the series to appeal to both a critical reader and the public then, and the two audiences were compatible because the latter, the public, was respectable, i.e., itself aspiring to have never quite reaching the standards of a critical reader. Nor it should be added to these critical or more enlightened readers disdain the cause of the respectable public. Part of the enduring glory of the debate over the Constitution in 1787 through 88 was that it showed at what a high level the cause of popular government could be. Indeed, had to be defended, if it was to be something honorable. The Federalists represented the high point of this high-level debate, but it served also as a model of candor, civility, and deliberation for future American political disputes. Unlike Solon, the American Publius would never desert his country, but would always be present in literary form to counsel it. Hamilton restated the point in the preface's concluding sentence. The great wish is that it may promote the cause of truth and lead to a right judgment of the true interests of the community. The Federalist was at once a practical work designed to persuade the community of its interests, and a more theoretical work serving the cause of truth. The cause of popular Republican government depended on the capacity of societies of men, and particularly the people of this country. In the words of the Federalist No. 1, to establish good government from reflection and choice. Otherwise, the cause of the people would collapse, and they would be forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force. But the ability of the people to govern themselves depended on their willingness to allow reflection to guide their choice. Depended, in other words, on their willingness to take seriously the debate over the Constitution, to abide by the deliberative style of democratic or Republican politics that the Federalists did so much to establish, and to heed the counsels of the Federalist in choosing to ratify and later uphold the Constitution of the United States. Throughout their labors, the authors of the Federalist adhered fairly closely to the outline of the series announced in Federalist No. 1. I propose in a series of papers to discuss the following interesting particulars. Publius wrote, "The utility of the Union to your political prosperity, the insufficiency of the present Confederation to preserve that Union, the necessity of a government at least equally energetic with the one proposed to the attainment of this object, the conformity of the proposed Constitution to the true principles of republican government, its analogy to your own state constitution, and lastly, the additional security which its adoption will afford the preservation of that species of government, to liberty and to property." This outline was followed, though not without modification. The fourth topic on the Constitution's conformity to the true principles of republican government grew to be a survey of the particular structure of the whole government, encompassing Federalist number 47 through 84. The fifth and sixth topics, anticipated and exhausted, in the previous section, shrink accordingly to the dimensions of a single paragraph apiece in the concluding paper, Federalist number 85. As indicated in the beginning agenda, Publius' discussion was organized around two broad subjects: Union and the proposed Constitution. These subjects in turn corresponded to the 2 volumes of the collected Federalist Papers. Union was the subject of the first 36 numbers of the Federalist, assembled in the first bound volume, and the merits of this Constitution absorbed the next 49 papers, numbers 37 through 85, published in the second. And general outline, then, the argument of the book takes this form. Talks about the volumes. Instead of reading all about how the volumes of the Federalist Papers were formed, we're just going to go right in. Federalist Paper number 1, General Introduction by Hamilton. After an unequivocal experience of the inefficacy of the subsisting federal government, you are called upon to deliberate on a new Constitution for the United States of America. The subject speaks its own importance, comprehending in its consequences nothing less than the existence of the Union, the safety and welfare of the parts of which it is composed, the fate of an entire empire, in many respects the most interesting in the world. It has been frequently remarked that it seems to have been reserved to the people of this country, by their conduct and example, to decide the important question, whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend on their political constitutions on accident and force. If there be any truth in the remark, the crisis at which we are arrived may with propriety be regarded as the era in which that decision is to be made, and a wrong election of the part we shall act may in this view deserve to be considered as the general misfortune of mankind. This idea will add the inducements of philanthropy to those of patriotism, to heighten the solicitude which all considerate and good men must feel for the event. Happy will it be if our choice should be directed by a judicious estimate of our true interests, unperplexed and unbiased by considerations not connected with the public good. But this is a thing more ardently to be wished than seriously to be expected. The plan offered to our deliberations affects too many particular interests, innovates upon too many local institutions, not to involve in its discussion a variety of objects foreign to its merits, into views, passions, and prejudices little favorable to the discovery of truth. Among the most formidable of the obstacles which the new Constitution will have to encounter may readily be distinguished the obvious interest of a certain class of men in every state to resist all changes which may hazard a diminution of the power, emolument, and consequence of the offices they hold under the state establishments, and the perverted ambition of another class of men, who will either hope to aggrandize themselves by the confusions of their country, or will flatter themselves with fairer prospects of elevation from the subdivisions of the empire into several partial confederacies than from its union under one government. It is not, however, my design to dwell upon observations of this nature, I am well aware that it would be disingenuous to resolve indiscriminately the opposition of any set of men, merely because their situations might subject them to suspicion, into interested or ambitious views. Candor will oblige us to admit that even such men may be actuated by upright intentions, and it cannot be doubted that much of the opposition which has made its appearance, or may hereafter make its appearance, will spring from sources, blameless at least if not respectable, the honest errors of minds led astray by preconceived jealousies and fears. So numerous indeed and so powerful are the causes which serve to give false bias to the judgment, that we, upon many occasions, see wise and good men on the wrong as well as on the right side of questions of the first magnitude to society. This circumstance, if duly attended to, would furnish a lesson of moderation to those who are ever so thoroughly persuaded of their being in the right in any controversy. And a further reason for caution in this respect might be drawn from the reflection that we are not always sure that those who advocate the truth are influenced by purer principles than their antagonists. Ambition, avarice, personal animosity, party opposition, and many other motives are not more laudable than these, are apt to operate as well upon those who support as those who oppose the right side of the question. Were there not even these inducements to moderation, nothing would be more ill-judged than that intolerant spirit which has at all times characterized political parties. For in politics, as in religion, it is equally absurd to aim at making proselytes by fire and sword. Heresies in either can rarely be cured by persecution. And yet, however just these sentiments will be weird. Yet, however just these sentiments will be allowed to be, we have already sufficient indications that it will happen in this, as in all former cases of great national discussion. A torrent of angry and malignant passions will be let loose. To judge from the conduct of the opposite parties, we shall be led to conclude that they will mutually hope to evince the justness of their opinions, and to increase the number of their converts by the loudness of their declamations and by the bitterness of their invectives. An enlightened zeal for the energy and efficiency of government will be stigmatized as the offspring of a temper fond of despotic power and hostile to the principles of liberty. An over-scrupulous jealousy of danger to the rights of the people, which is more commonly the fault of the head than to the heart, will be represented as mere pretense and artifice, the stale bait for popularity at the expense of public good. It will be forgotten, on the one hand, that jealousy is the usual concomitant of violent love, and that the noble enthusiasm of liberty is too apt to be infected with a spirit of narrow and illiberal distrust. On the other hand, it will be equally forgotten that the vigor of government is essential to the security of liberty, that, in the contemplation of a sound and well-informed judgment, their interests can never be separated. And that is a dangerous ambition more often lurks behind the spacious mask of zeal for the rights of the people than under the forbidding appearance of zeal for the firmness and efficiency of government. History will teach us that the former has been found a much more certain road to the introduction of despotism than the latter, and that those of men who have overturned the liberties of republics, the greatest number have begun their career by paying an obsequious court to the people, commencing demagogues and ending tyrants. In the course of the preceding observations, I have had an eye, my fellow citizens, to putting you upon your guard against all attempts, from whatever quarter, to influence your decision in a matter of the utmost moment to your welfare by any impressions other than those which may result from the evidence of truth. You will no doubt at the same time have collected from the general scope of them that they proceed from a source not unfriendly to the Constitution. Yes, my countrymen, I own to you that after having given it an attentive consideration, I am clearly of opinion it is your interest to adopt it. I am convinced that this is the safest course for your liberty, your dignity, and your happiness. I affect not reserves which I do not feel. I will not assume you with an appearance of deliberation when I have decided. I frankly acknowledge to you my convictions, and I will freely lay before you the reasons on which they are founded. The consciousness of good intentions disdains ambiguity. I shall not, however, multiply professions on this head. My motives must remain in the depository of my own breast. My arguments will be open to all and may be judged of by all. They shall at least be offered in a spirit which will not disgrace the cause of truth. I propose in a series of papers to discuss the following interesting particulars: the utility of the Union to your political prosperity, the insufficiency of the present Confederation to preserve that Union, the necessity of a government at least equally energetic with the one proposed to the attainment of this object, the conformity of the proposed Constitution to the true principles of the Republican government, its analogy to your own state constitution, and lastly, the additional security which its adoption will afford to the preservation of that species of government, to liberty and property. In the progress of this discussion, I shall endeavor to give a satisfactory answer to all of the objections which shall have been made their appearance that may seem to have any claim to your attention. It may perhaps be thought superfluous to offer arguments to prove the utility of the Union, a point, no doubt, deeply engraved on the hearts of the great body of the people in every state, and one which, it may be imagined, has no adversaries. But the fact is that we already hear it whispered in the private circles of those who oppose the new Constitution, that the 13 states are of too great extent for any generalist system, and that we must of necessity resort to separate confederacies of distinct portions of the whole. This doctrine will, in all probability, be gradually propagated till it has votaries enough to countenance an open avowal of it. For nothing can be more evident to those who are able to take an enlarged view of the subject than the alternative of an adoption of the new Constitution or a dismemberment of the Union. It will therefore be of use to begin by examining the advantages of that Union, the certain evils, and the probable dangers to which every state will be exposed from its dissolution. This shall accordingly constitute the subject of my next address. Publius. Thank you for everybody who tuned in for reading live. Remember, again, I am now reading the Federalist Papers because I got kicked off TikTok Live for reading Napalm and Silly Putty by George Carlin. And when I tried to upload a video of me reading Napalm and Silly Putty, they removed the sound. So fine. I'm reading something else. I will not be censored. I will not be silenced. And you shouldn't be either. Thank you for watching live. I intend to read again tomorrow night. Take care. Espero que Dios te bendiga. Shalom aleichem. Hasta la próxima. Maybe.